In the fog-laden streets of Victorian London, where shadows conceal secrets and every cobblestone whispers of intrigue, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson face a case that begins with a seemingly simple tragedy, the fatal fall of a roofer from a towering rooftop. But as Holmes peels back the layers of this accident, a web of greed, betrayal, and a cunningly disguised murder emerges, leading to a twist that will challenge even his brilliant mind. Join us in this gripping tale of deduction, danger, and a resolution that will leave you astounded. Chapter 1. The Urgent Summons. The autumn of 1888 draped London in a shroud of fog and melancholy, and I, Dr. John Watson, found myself once again in the familiar confines of 221B Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes, my friend and companion, lounged in his armchair, his violin abandoned on the table, a testament to his restless mood. For weeks, no case of sufficient merit had crossed our threshold, and Holmes' sharp intellect, deprived of stimulation, teetered on the edge of ennui. "It is a cruel irony, Watson," he remarked, his voice tinged with irritation, "that a city teeming with crime offers nothing to challenge a mind such as mine. Pickpockets and petty forgers. Bah! I crave a puzzle worthy of my faculties." I glanced up from my newspaper, which detailed yet another mundane robbery. Surely, Holmes, something will present itself. London never lacks for mysteries. As if fate itself had overheard, a sharp rap echoed from the door below. Mrs. Hudson's muffled voice soon followed, and within moments she ushered in a visitor, a woman of perhaps 40, dressed in mourning black, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes, red-rimmed from weeping, darted nervously about the room before settling on Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice trembling, "I am Mrs. Eleanor Grayson. I need your help. My husband, Thomas Grayson, a roofer by trade, is dead, fallen from a rooftop in Cheapside. The police say it was an accident, but I cannot believe it. Thomas was no novice. He had scaled roofs for 20 years without mishap. I beg you, sir, uncover the truth." Holmes leaned forward, his ennui vanishing like mist in sunlight. "Pray, Mrs. Grayson, be precise. When did this occur, and what were the circumstances?" She clasped her hands tightly. "It was 2 nights ago, near midnight. Thomas was working late on a repair for Mr. Hargreaves, a wealthy merchant whose warehouse roof had sprung leaks. The foreman found him the next morning, broken on the cobbles below. The police claim he slipped, perhaps due to drink, but Thomas was a temperate man. He was careful, always checking his footing, and yet," her voice broke, "there was no one else on the roof, they say." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that familiar intensity. "No one else, you say? Curious. Was your husband in good spirits? Any enemies, debts or quarrels?" Mrs. Grayson hesitated. "He was preoccupied of late. He spoke little, but I sensed a burden on him. He mentioned a disagreement with Mr. Hargreaves over payment, but nothing more. As for enemies, I know of none, but Thomas kept his work close. He was not one to share troubles." Holmes rose, his movements brisk. "Watson, my coat. Mrs. Grayson, we shall visit the scene at once. A man of 20 years' experience does not simply fall. There is more here than meets the eye." As we prepared to depart, Holmes paused, fixing our client with a piercing gaze. "One last question, Mrs. Grayson. Did your husband ever mention a man named Carver, or a group called the Order of the Saffron Veil?" She frowned, bewildered. "Oh, never. What does that mean?" Holmes waved a hand dismissively. Perhaps nothing. Come, Watson. The game is afoot. We descended into the fog-choked streets, my heart quickening with the thrill of a new adventure. Little did I know that this case would lead us into a labyrinth of deception, where every clue would point to a truth far darker than a mere accident. What did you think of the opening to this thrilling Sherlock Holmes mystery? Where are you listening this tale from? London's misty streets, a cozy fireside, or somewhere far across the globe? Drop your location below and let us know. If you're eager to unravel the secrets of the roofer's fatal fall with Holmes and Watson, subscribe to our channel for the next chapter and join the adventure. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, where the rooftop reveals its first secrets. Chapter 2. The Rooftop Scene. The fog clung to London like a conspirator as our hansom cab rattled toward Cheapside. Sherlock Holmes sat in silence, his sharp profile illuminated intermittently by the gaslights we passed. I knew that look. His mind was already dissecting Mrs. Grayson's words, turning each detail over like a jeweler inspecting a gem. As for me, I pondered the tragedy of Thomas Grayson, a man whose skill had not saved him from a fatal plunge. We arrived at a narrow street, dominated by the looming bulk of Hargreaves' warehouse, its steep slate-covered roof cutting a jagged silhouette against the murky sky. A constable stood guard at the alley's entrance, his lantern casting a feeble glow. Holmes flashed a card, some official-looking document that always seemed to materialize when needed, and the constable stepped aside with a nod. "Show me precisely where the body was found," Holmes instructed. The constable led us to a spot in the alley, marked by a chalk outline on the cobbles. "Here, sir. Face down, arms splayed. Poor devil must have fallen straight from the ridge up there." He pointed to the roof's peak, some 40 feet above. Holmes crouched, his long fingers tracing the chalk. "No bloodstains, Watson. Curious for such a fall." He stood and scanned the alley walls, his eyes darting to the warehouse's brick facade. "And no signs of a struggle down here. Tell me, Constable, was the body moved before the police arrived?" "Only by the foreman, Mr. Dutton, who found him at dawn. He checked for signs of life, then called for us, said it looked like Grayson slipped during the night shift's work." Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. "Slipped, did he? Let us ascend." A rickety ladder leaned against the warehouse, leading to a scaffolding platform just below the roof. Holmes climbed with the agility of a cat, and I followed less gracefully. The roof itself was a treacherous slope of slate tiles, slick with recent rain and patched in places with fresh tar. A low parapet ran along the edge, barely a foot high, scant protection for a man working in darkness. Holmes moved with purpose, his magnifying glass in hand, examining the ridge where Grayson had likely stood. "Watson, observe the tiles here. No scuff marks, no dislodged slate. A man falling should have left some trace of desperation, a claw at the edge, perhaps." He knelt, peering at a patch of tar, and this freshly applied, yet uneven. "Someone has tampered with this roof since Grayson's death." I frowned, struggling to keep my footing. Tampered? To cover what? Holmes did not answer. Instead, he produced a small knife and scraped a sample of the tar into a vial. "The answer lies in the details, Watson. This tar is not merely a repair, it's a concealment." He pointed to a faint indentation near the parapet, barely visible. A tool mark, perhaps a crowbar. Not the work of a roofer finishing a job. As we descended, Holmes questioned the constable further. Who else had access to this roof that night? Only the foreman Dutton and another roofer, a man named Carver. They were both at the site earlier, but claimed they left by dusk. Grayson insisted on staying late to finish the job alone. Carver, Holmes murmured, his eyes narrowing. And where might we find this Mr. Dutton now? At the Black Bull Tavern, most like, sir. He said's been drowning his sorrows since the incident. Holmes's gaze lingered on the roof set's edge, as if it whispered secrets only he could hear. Come, Watson. The Black Bull awaits, and with it perhaps the first thread of this tangled skein. As we stepped back into the fog, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen. Grayson's fall was no mere accident. Holmes' keen senses had already scented foul play, and I knew we were on the cusp of unravelling something far more sinister. Chapter 3. The Victim's Background. The Black Bull Tavern was a dimly lit den of tobacco smoke and raucous laughter, tucked in a grimy corner of Cheapside. As Holmes and I pushed through the heavy door, the din of conversation dipped briefly, curious eyes sizing us up before returning to their pints. Holmes, undeterred, scanned the room with his usual precision, his gaze settling on a burly man slumped at the bar, nursing a tankard. His weathered face and calloused hands marked him as a man of manual trade, likely Mr. Dutton, the foreman. Holmes approached with a disarming smile. Mr. Dutton, I presume, Sherlock Holmes and my colleague, Dr. Watson. We so investigating the unfortunate death of Thomas Grayson. Dutton's bloodshot eyes narrowed. Police already poked about, said it was an accident. What's left to investigate? Truth, Mr. Dutton, Holmes replied smoothly, sliding onto a stool beside him. Tell me about Grayson. What sort of man was he? Dutton took a long swig, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Thomas was the best roofer I ever worked with. Steady as a rock, never careless. Been at it since he was a lad, apprenticed under old man Hargreaves himself before the merchant turned to warehouses. Thomas could walk a ridgepole in a storm and not blink. I jotted notes as Holmes leaned closer. On his character? Any troubles, debts, quarrels, or perhaps a fondness for the bottle? Dutton bristled. Thomas? Drunk? Rubbish? He was a family man, devoted to Eleanor and their boy young William. If he had troubles, he kept 'em quiet. Though he hesitated, glancing around as if wary of eavesdroppers. He'd been off lately, distracted, kept muttering about debts not his own, and some row with Hargreaves over wages. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Debts not his own. Elaborate, please. Dutton shrugged. Didn't say much, just grumbled now and then. Said Hargreaves owed him for extra work. Something about a special job on the warehouse roof, not just repairs. Thomas wouldn't explain, but he was sore about it. And this Carver, Holmes pressed, his tone casual, but his gaze sharp. What of him? Dutton's face darkened. Jacob Carver sits a snake. Another roofer. Works for Hargreaves too. Always sniffing around Thomas' jobs, trying to undercut him. They had words a week back. Near came to blows. Carver the sort who sabotage. A mate work to get ahead. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. One last thing, Mr. Dutton. Did Grayson ever mention the Order of the Saffron Veil? Dutton blinked, puzzled. Saffron. What? Never heard of it. Thomas wasn't one for secret clubs or nonsense. He was all roofs and home, nothing else. As we left the tavern, the fog had thickened, wrapping the street in a ghostly veil. Holmes walked with a brisk stride, his mind clearly racing. Watson, Our roofer was no ordinary tradesman. Debts not his own, a special job, a rival with a grudge. This is no simple fall. We must see Hargreaves next. If Grayson was entangled in something beyond mere roofing, the merchant may hold the key. I nodded, my curiosity piqued. You mentioned this order again, Holmes. What is it? He gave a cryptic smile. A shadow, Watson. Perhaps nothing more, but shadows often hide the sharpest truths. As we hailed a cab, I sensed the case deepening. Each new detail, a thread in a tapestry Holmes was already beginning to unravel. The roofer's life, it seemed, held secrets that had followed him to his death. Chapter 4. Witness Accounts. Witness Accounts. The morning following our visit to the Black Bull Tavern dawned grey and damp, the kind of London weather that seemed to seep into one's bones. Sherlock Holmes, however, was undeterred by the gloom, his energy crackling like a storm about to break. Over breakfast at 221B Baker Street, he pored over his notes, his long fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the table. I had scarcely finished my toast when he sprang up, his eyes alight with purpose. "Watson, we must return to Cheapside," he declared, already reaching for his coat. "The witnesses to Grayson's final hours hold pieces of the puzzle, and I intend to collect them. The constable mentioned bystanders who saw the body discovered. Common folk often notice what officials overlook. Watson's. We arrived at the warehouse district by mid-morning, the fog having lifted just enough to reveal the bustle of carts and labourers. The alley where Thomas Grayson had met his end was quieter now, save for a few curious onlookers lingering near the chalk outline, which had begun to fade under the drizzle. Holmes wasted no time, approaching a grizzled street vendor who was hawking pies from a cart nearby. "Good sir," Holmes began, his tone genial, "I am investigating the sad affair of the roofer who fell here 2 days ago. Were you present when the body was found?" The vendor, a wiry man with a face like crumpled parchment, squinted at Holmes. I was here. Name's Ned Stokes. Saw the foreman Dutton come running out, hollering for help. Poor bloke was proper shook. Said he found Grayson dead at first light. Never seen a man so pale. And I don't mean the corpse." Holmes nodded, his gaze sharp. "And what of the night before? Did you see Grayson working, or anyone else near the warehouse?" Neddard scratched his stubbled shin. "Was here late, selling to the night workers. Saw Grayson up on the roof round 10, fixing slates by lantern light. Looked steady enough, no wobbling or such, but there was another fellow skulking about the alley, tall, with a limp. Didn't get a good look, mind. He was gone quick, like he didn't want to be seen." "A limp, you say?" Holmes Sepp's voice was calm, but I caught the glint of interest in his eyes. "Anything else about this man? His attire, perhaps?" "Wore a dark coat, maybe navy, and a cap pulled low. That sits all I got. Too dark to see much." Ned paused, then added, "Mind you, there was a queer thing. Heard a clatter from the roof just before I packed up. Sounded like metal on slate, but I figured it was Grayson Sitt's tools." Holmes thanked the vendor with a coin and moved on, his attention now on a group of warehouse labourers gathered near a loading dock. I followed, jotting notes as he questioned them with the precision of a surgeon. The labourers, a rough lot with dirt-streaked faces, confirmed Dutton's story. Grayson had stayed late to finish a repair job, while Dutton and Carver had left by dusk. But one man, a young apprentice named Billy, spoke up hesitantly. "Begging your pardon, sir," Billy said, twisting his cap in his hands. "But I saw something odd that night. I was sweeping the yard when I heard voices up top. Grayson's, I reckon, and another, couldn't make out words, but they sounded cross. Then it went quiet, and I didn't think much of it till I heard about the fall. Holmes sits, eyes narrowed. Voices, you say? Could you identify the second speaker? Billy shook his head. No, sir. Too far off, and the wind was up, but it wasn't Sid Dutton. I know his voice, all gruff-like. This one was sharper, almost posh. Posh, Holmes repeated, a faint smile playing on his lips. Most intriguing. And did you see this man with the limp that Ned described? No, sir, but I wasn't stit in the alley. I was round the front, near the main doors. We moved next to a flower girl, who had been near the scene at dawn. She was a slight thing, no older than 16, with a basket of wilting violets. I saw the foreman find him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Dutton looked right ill when he saw the body. Kept muttering, not like this, not like this. I thought he meant the fall, but it sounded personal, like he knew something. Holmes pressed her gently. Did you notice anything on the ground near the body? Anything unusual? She frowned, thinking. There was a bit of cloth, sir, caught on a nail by the ladder. Red, maybe silk. I pointed it out to the constable, but he said it was nothing. They took it away with the body. Holmes' expression remained impassive, but I could tell his mind was racing. A red silk cloth, he murmured. Not the sort of thing a roofer carries. Thank you, my dear. As we left the alley, Holmes walked slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Watson, the picture begins to form, though it is far from complete. A man with a limp, a posh voice on the roof, a clatter of metal, and a scrap of red silk. These are not the trappings of an accident. Grayson was not alone that night, and someone has gone to great lengths to obscure the truth. I frowned, trying to piece it together. But who, Holmes? Carver? Or this Hargreaves, perhaps? Patience, Watson, he replied, his voice low. We shall visit Mr. Hargreaves next, but first I must confirm a suspicion. That tar we found. It holds a secret, I am certain, to the laboratory, my friend. The game grows more intricate by the hour. As we hailed a cab, I felt the weight of the mystery pressing heavier. Each witness had added a fragment to the puzzle, but the image remained tantalizingly out of reach. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, as if the very complexity of the case was a tonic to his restless mind. Chapter 5. The Grieving Family. The drizzle had turned to a steady rain by the time Sherlock Holmes and I reached the modest terraced house in Bethnal Green, where Thomas Grayson had lived with his family. The street was a row of soot-stained brick homes, their small windows glowing faintly against the damp gloom of the afternoon. As we knocked, I could not help but feel a pang of sympathy for the widow and son now bereft of their provider. Holmes, however, maintained his usual air of detached focus, his mind, no doubt, sifting through the fragments of evidence we had gathered. The door creaked open to reveal Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, still clad in her mourning black, her face etched with grief, but composed. Beside her stood a boy of about 12, his eyes red but defiant, clutching his mother's hand. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she said, her voice steadier than at our first meeting. Thank you for coming. This is my son, William. Please, come in. We stepped into a small parlour, sparsely furnished but tidy, with a faint smell of coal and lavender. A photograph of Thomas Grayson, stern-faced and proud in his workman's apron, hung above the mantel. Holmes' gaze lingered on it briefly before he turned to Mrs. Grayson, who gestured for us to sit. Mrs. Grayson, Holmes began, his tone gentle but precise. "We have spoken with the foreman and several witnesses, but I need a clearer picture of your husband Sit's life. Any detail, however small, may illuminate the truth behind his death." She nodded, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "Thomas was a good man, Mr. Holmes. Hard-working, honest to a fault. He took pride in his trade, learned it from his father, who roofed churches in his day. Thomas always said a good roof was a man's legacy, keeping folk dry and safe. But these last few months, he changed. He was distant, like a shadow hung over him." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "This shadow, did he speak of its cause? Debts, perhaps, or trouble with his employer, Mr. Hargreaves?" Mrs. Grayson's lips tightened. "He mentioned Hargreaves often, and not kindly. Thomas said the merchant was pressing him to do extra work, special repairs, he called them, on that warehouse roof. He was owed money, a fair sum, but Hargreaves kept delaying payment. Thomas said it wasn't just about the money, though. There was something else, something he wouldn't tell me. He'd come home late, his hands shaking, and once I heard him muttering about promises kept in the dark. I begged him to explain, but he'd only say it was for our safety." Young William, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up, his voice sharp with anger. "Pa wasn't set clumsy, sir. He could climb any roof, even in the rain. Someone did this to him. I know it." Holmes regarded the boy with a rare softness. "Your father sounds like a man of skill, William. Did he ever mention a man named Carver? Or perhaps a group called the Order of the Saffron Veil?" William frowned, shaking his head. "No, sir. Per didn't talk about work much, except when he was cross with Mr. Hargreaves. But I saw something. A few weeks back, Per came home with a funny bit of cloth in his pocket, red like silk with gold threads. I asked him what it was, and he got all quiet, stuffed it away, said it was nothing, but he looked scared." Mrs. Grayson's eyes widened. "I never saw that cloth. Thomas kept his work things in a locked box under the bed. I haven't had the heart to open it since." Her voice faltered. Holmes Stubbs's expression remained impassive, but I could see the spark of interest in his eyes. "May we examine this box, Mrs. Grayson? It may hold answers." She hesitated, then nodded, leading us to a small bedroom. From beneath a narrow iron bedstead, she pulled a wooden box, its lock simple but sturdy. Holmes produced a small tool from his pocket, a lock-pick no doubt, and within moments the lid creaked open. Inside were tools, a worn leather apron, and a few papers, invoices, work orders, and a single letter, folded tightly and sealed with plain wax. Holmes unfolded the letter with care, his eyes scanning the contents. "Unsigned," he murmured, "but written in a hurried hand. Complete the task by the new moon, or the debt is forfeit. The order watches." Most intriguing. He tucked the letter into his pocket, then sifted through the box, pausing at a small tarnished key, hidden in a corner. "This, Watson, is no ordinary key. Its shape suggests a private lock, perhaps to a safe or a hidden compartment." Mrs. Grayson watched, her face pale. "What debt, Mr. Holmes? Thomas never spoke of owing anyone, not like this." "That," Holmes said, rising, "is what we shall uncover. One final question, Mrs. Grayson. Did your husband have any unusual visitors in recent weeks, perhaps a man with a limp or someone of refined speech?" She shook her head. "No one, save the usual tradesmen, but William might be right. Thomas was hiding something. I thought it was just worry, but now," her voice broke, and William gripped her hand tighter. As we took our leave, Holmes paused at the door. "Rest assured, Mrs. Grayson, William, we shall find the truth. Your husband Sit's death was no accident, and those responsible will answer for it." Outside, the rain had eased, but the air felt heavier, as if the mystery itself pressed down upon us. Holmes walked in silence, the key and letter now safely in his possession. "Watson," he said at last, "the red silk, the cryptic letter, the key, this case is a tapestry of secrets, and Grayson was but a thread. Hargreaves is our next step, but I suspect this order is the loom on which this crime was woven." I nodded, my mind racing with questions. Who was this order, and what hold did they have over a simple roofer? As we stepped into the damp streets, I felt the case tightening around us like a noose, each clue pulling us deeper into a darkness I could not yet fathom. Chapter 6. Clues in the Heights. The late afternoon sun pierced the clouds as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way back to the Cheapside warehouse, the scene of Thomas Grayson's fatal plunge. Holmes had insisted on a second visit to the rooftop, armed now with the cryptic letter and key from Grayson's box, as well as his own deductions from the witnesses' accounts. His stride was purposeful, his eyes alight with that intense focus that always signaled he was closing in on a vital thread of the mystery. I, for my part, carried a small satchel with Holmes's magnifying glass, vials and other tools of his trade, feeling the familiar thrill of being swept into one of his intricate investigations. As we climbed the ladder once more, the wind whipped at our coats, carrying the distant clamour of the city below. The roof appeared much as before, sloping slates patched with tar, the low parapet offering little barrier against a misstep. But Holmes moved with renewed vigour, directing me to secure a rope for safety as he edged toward the ridge where Grayson had likely stood. "Watson," he said, his voice cutting through the gusts, "observe the tar patches again. Earlier I noted their uneven application. Now, with the letter's mention of a task by the new moon, I suspect these are not mere repairs but markers or concealments." He knelt, producing his knife to carefully peel back a section of the tar. Beneath it, the slate was scratched, revealing faint etchings, symbols that resembled interlocking veils, dyed faintly saffron in hue. Holmes's breath caught slightly, a rare sign of surprise. Holmes's breath caught slightly, a rare sign of surprise. "The Order of the Saffron Veil," he murmured. "Not a figment, then, but a reality etched into the very roof." I peered over his shoulder, puzzled. "What is this order, Holmes? You've alluded to it before, but never explained." He straightened, pocketing a flake of the etched slate. "A clandestine society, Watson, rumoured among certain circles. They trace their origins to ancient Eastern mystics, but have evolved into a modern cabal of influencers, merchants, politicians, even tradesmen, who trade in secrets and favours. Their symbol is the Saffron Veil, representing hidden truths. If Grayson was involved, his special repairs may have been coding messages or hiding artifacts on this roof for the Order's use." As he spoke, Holmes scanned the rooftop further, his gaze settling on a chimney stack at the far end, partially obscured by scaffolding. "That chimney! It's out of place for a warehouse, too ornate, with brickwork that suggests recent modification." He moved toward it, examining the base where mortar met slate. "Fresh grout here, Watson. And look, a faint outline, as if a panel has been sealed." Using his knife, Holmes pried at the mortar, revealing a loose brick that shifted with a grating sound. Behind it was a small compartment, just large enough for a hand. From within, he withdrew a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, a ledger, its pages filled with coded entries, and beside it a small vial of saffron powder. But most intriguingly, the key from Grayson's box fit perfectly into a tiny lock on the ledger's clasp. "Remarkable," Holmes said, flipping through the pages. This is no ordinary account book. The entries are in cipher, combinations of numbers and symbols, debts perhaps, but not financial ones. Look here, Hargreaves owes 3 veils, and Carver claims 2, but disputed. The order's ledger of favors and secrets, hidden on the roof Grayson was repairing. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. So Grayson was part of this society, and his death related to this ledger? Holmes nodded slowly. Likely, the letter warned of a debt forfeit if the task wasn't completed. Perhaps Grayson was hiding or altering this ledger on the order's behalf, but someone intervened. Remember the witnesses, a posh voice arguing on the roof, a man with a limp skulking below, the red silk scrap, red silk with gold threads. William described something similar. It could be a token of the order, torn in a struggle. As we descended, Holmes paused on the scaffolding, his eyes tracing the alley below. The fall was engineered, Watson. No scuff marks on the ridge suggest Grayson didn't slip. He was pushed, or perhaps lured to the edge. But how, without witnesses seeing another on the roof? Back on solid ground, Holmes examined the ladder once more, noting faint boot prints in the mud at its base, prints that didn't match the heavy tread of a roofer's boots, but were narrower, more refined. Our posh-voiced intruder, he mused, and the limp perhaps from an old injury, which would explain a cautious climb. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over Cheapside, Holmes pocketed his finds. "We have clues aplenty now, Watson, but the puzzle is far from solved. Hargreaves must be confronted. He is tied to this order, I am certain, and Carver, the rival, may be a pawn or a player. Tonight we delve deeper, but beware. The heights hold more than physical danger. The order watches, as the letter said, and they may already know we're ascending their hidden ladder." I nodded, my pulse quickening. The rooftop had yielded its secrets, but each revelation only deepened the enigma, drawing us higher into a web where one false step could prove as fatal as Grayson's fall. Chapter 7. The Shady Contractor. Evening had fallen over London by the time Sherlock Holmes and I arrived at the opulent residence of Mr. Reginald Hargreaves, the wealthy merchant whose warehouse roof had been the stage for Thomas Grayson's demise. Situated in the affluent district of Kensington, the house was a grand affair of red brick and wrought-iron gates, its windows aglow with gaslight that cast flickering shadows on the manicured lawn. As our cab pulled up, I couldn't shake the sense that we were stepping into the lair of a key player in this unfolding drama. Holmes, ever the picture of composure, adjusted his collar and rapped sharply on the door with his walking stick. A butler, stiff and impeccable in his livery, answered and eyed us with mild suspicion. "Mr. Hargreaves is not receiving visitors at this hour," he intoned. Holmes produced a card with a flourish. "Inform your master that Sherlock Holmes is here regarding the unfortunate accident at his Cheapside warehouse. I assure you he will wish to speak with us." The butler hesitated, then disappeared inside. Moments later, he returned, ushering us into a lavish study lined with oak bookshelves and heavy velvet curtains. Seated behind a massive mahogany desk was Reginald Hargreaves himself, a portly man in his 50s, with a florid face framed by mutton chop whiskers and eyes that darted like a cornered fox. He rose partially, gesturing to chairs with a hand that bore a heavy gold signet ring. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice smooth but laced with unease. "I've heard of your reputation. The police have already ruled poor Grayson's death an accident. What brings you to my door?" Holmes settled into a chair, his gaze fixed on Hargreaves with unnerving intensity. "Accidents, Mr. Hargreaves, are often veils for darker deeds. Thomas Grayson was your employee, a skilled roofer entrusted with special repairs on your warehouse. Tell me, what precisely were these repairs, and why did you owe him payment?" Hargreaves shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Special repairs? Nonsense. It was routine work. Leaks from the recent storms. Grayson was competent, yes, but overcharged for his services. We had a minor dispute over fees, nothing more. As for his death, tragic, but roofs are dangerous places, especially at night." I watched as Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Come now, Mr. Hargreaves. We both know the roof held more than slates and tar. The Order of the Saffron Veil, does that name stir your memory? Etchings on the slates, a hidden ledger in the chimney. Grayson was not patching leaks, he was safeguarding secrets for your clandestine society." Hargreaves' face paled, his composure cracking like thin ice. "The Order? How? That's preposterous. I know nothing of such things. Grayson was a mere tradesman, not involved in whatever fantasies you've concocted." Holmes smiled thinly, producing the ledger from his coat pocket and placing it on the desk. "This was concealed on your roof, unlocked by a key from Grayson's possessions. Its entries mention you by name, debts of Veils, favors owed, and this letter," he added, unfolding the cryptic note, "complete the task, or the debt is forfeit. The Order watches. Grayson was your intermediary, hiding this ledger, but someone discovered it. Perhaps you argued with him that night, your posher's voice heard by witnesses, leading to his fatal fall." Hargreaves mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his eyes flicking to the door as if contemplating escape. "You're mistaken, Holmes. Yes, I belong to the Order, a gentleman's club for mutual aid, nothing sinister. We use symbols and codes for discretion, but murder, absurd. Grayson volunteered for the task. He owed the Order a favor from years ago, a debt his father incurred. I paid him extra to hide the ledger safely, but I wasn't on that roof. I was here, dining with associates. Ask my staff." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Associates, names, if you please." "Jacob Carver, for one." Hargreaves replied hastily. "My other contractor, and a few others, business partners. Carver can vouch for me. He left late that evening." "Carver," Holmes echoed, his tone laced with suspicion. "The rival roofer with a grudge against Grayson. Convenient. And what of a man with a limp seen skulking near the warehouse? Or the red silk token, torn perhaps in a struggle?" Hargreaves swallowed hard. "I know no one with a limp. As for silk, the Order uses saffron scarves as tokens, but red, that's not our color. You must believe me, Holmes, I had no hand in Grayson's death. If the ledger was at risk, perhaps someone outside the Order sought it, a betrayer or thief." Holmes rose, pocketing the ledger once more. "Your alibi will be verified, Mr. Hargreaves, but mark my words, the shadows of your society are long, and they may yet ensnare you. If you withhold anything further, it will not go well." As we departed, the merchant's protests fading behind us, Holmes walked briskly into the night air. "Watson, Hargreaves is frightened, but not entirely guilty. His fear is of exposure, not capture. The Order is real, and Grayson was entangled in its web, but the killer may be a thread pulling from within or without. I glanced back at the house, its lights now seeming ominous. Carver next, then, or this man with the limp? Holmes nodded, hailing a cab. Carver. Yes, but first Baker Street. I must decode this ledger fully. It holds the names of the players in this game. And beware, Watson. The order watches, and our intrusion may have stirred a hornet's nest. As the cab rattled away, I felt the noose of the mystery tightening, each revelation drawing us closer to a truth as precarious as a rooftop in the dark. Chapter 8. A Midnight Intruder. The clock on the mantel at 221B Baker Street had just struck midnight when I retired to my room, the events of the day swirling in my mind like the fog outside our windows. Sherlock Holmes had spent the evening hunched over the cryptic ledger from the warehouse roof, his pipe billowing smoke as he muttered to himself about ciphers and symbols. I had left him to it, knowing his brilliant mind often worked best in solitude, and drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by visions of rooftops and shadowy figures. It was a soft creak from the floorboards below that jolted me awake. At first, I dismissed it as the settling of the old house, but then came another sound, a faint scrape, like metal against wood. My heart quickened. Mrs. Hudson was long abed, and Holmes rarely stirred so clumsily. Slipping from my bed, I seized my service revolver from the nightstand and crept to the door, listening intently. The sitting room was dimly lit by the embers of the fire, casting elongated shadows across the walls. Holmes's armchair was empty, the ledger still open on the table beside a scattering of notes. But there, by the window, a dark figure was silhouetted against the moonlight filtering through the curtains. The intruder, clad in a black coat and hat pulled low, was rifling through Holmes's desk, his movements stealthy but urgent. I raised my revolver, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Halt, turn around slowly, or I'll shoot. The figure froze, then spun with surprising agility, a glint of steel in his hand, a knife perhaps. Before I could react, he lunged toward the window, smashing the glass with his elbow and leaping out into the night. I fired a warning shot into the air, the report echoing through the room, and dashed to the window, just in time to see the intruder scrambling down the drain pipe to the street below. "Holmes!" I shouted, but he was already bursting into the room, his dressing gown askew, a poker gripped like a weapon in his hand. "Watson, are you hurt?" "No," I replied, my breath coming in gasps. But the intruder, he was after something. The ledger? Holmes glanced at the table. The ledger was undisturbed, but his notes had been scattered. He knelt examining the floor where shards of glass glittered. Not the ledger itself, perhaps, but information about it. "Look here, a footprint in the dust. Narrow boot, refined make, not a common thief's. And this," he added, picking up a small object from the sill, a button engraved with a faint Saffron Veil symbol. "The order," I murmured, lowering my revolver. "They know we've taken the ledger." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Indeed, Watson. Hargreaves must have alerted them after our visit, or perhaps Carver. But our intruder was no mere messenger. He moved with purpose, and that limp, did you notice it as he fled?" I nodded, recalling the awkward gait as the figure hit the pavement and vanished into the fog. "Yes, a pronounced limp on the left side, matches the witness descriptions from the warehouse alley." Holmes straightened, his mind racing visibly. "Our skulking man with the limp is bold, venturing into the lion's den. He sought confirmation of what we know, or perhaps to retrieve this From the scattered notes, he plucked a scrap of paper, a decoded entry from the ledger. Carver claims debt on Grayson. Hargreaves disputes. Resolution by Veil Counsel. This ties Carver directly to Grayson's debt, Holmes explained. If Carver is part of the order, he may have seen Grayson as a rival, not just in trade, but in the society's favors. The intruder aimed to destroy this evidence. We spent the next hour securing the premises, Holmes meticulously searching for any other traces. Near the desk, he found a faint smudge of mud, similar to that from the warehouse ladder, and a strand of hair, dark and coarse. Not conclusive, he said, sealing it in an envelope, but it points to a man of labor, perhaps disguised. As dawn crept in, Holmes paced the room. His pipe reignited. This intrusion changes the game, Watson. The order is desperate, meaning the ledger holds power over them. We must confront Carver at first light. He's the link between Hargreaves, Grayson, and now this midnight visitor. But tread carefully. If the limping man is Carver himself, he may be more dangerous than we anticipate. I agreed, though sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. The case had invaded our sanctuary, turning Baker Street into another perilous height. As Holmes continued his vigil, I couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder had left not just chaos, but a warning. The shadows of the order were closing in, and our next step could lead to a fall of our own. Chapter 9. The Encrypted Note. Dawn broke over Baker Street, with a pale light filtering through the repaired window, but sleep had evaded both Holmes and me after the intruder's daring escape. As I brewed a pot of strong tea, Holmes sat at the table, the ledger spread before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. The decoded entry linking Carver to Grayson's debt had been a breakthrough, but the night's events had added urgency to our pursuit. Holmes had wired Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard for any reports of a limping suspect, but we awaited a reply. "Watson?" Holmes said abruptly, breaking the silence. "The ledger's ciphers are complex, but I've cracked another layer. Look here." He pointed to a page where symbols intertwined like vines. "This isn't just a record of debts, it's a map of obligations within the order." Grayson was tasked with hiding the ledger, but he added his own note, encrypted within the margins. I leaned in, squinting at the faint markings. His own note? What does it say? Holmes traced the lines with a pencil, translating as he went, "Beware the limping shadow. Carver seeks the veil for himself. Hargreaves blind. Debt not mine. Father's curse. Must reveal to Ed before fall." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "E for Eleanor, his wife. Grayson suspected betrayal, and left this as a warning. The limping shadow confirms our intruder, and Carver's ambition within the order." Before I could respond, a knock echoed from below. Mrs. Hudson with the Morning Post. Among the letters was a telegram from Lestrade. No reports of limping thief overnight. Warehouse foreman Dutton, arrested for brawl at Black Bull, claims innocence. Mentioned Carver. Holmes's lips curled into a smile. Providential, Watson. Dutton may know more than he let on. But first we decode the rest of this note. Grayson mentions father's curse, a reference to the debt Hargreaves spoke of, inherited from his apprenticeship days. If Carver is exploiting it, he could have confronted Grayson on the roof. As Holmes worked, I examined the button from the intruder saffron engraving, faint but distinct. "This order," I ventured, "how deep does it go? Merchants like Hargreaves, roofers like Grayson. It's an unlikely alliance." "Power transcends class, Watson," Holmes replied, without looking up. "The order trades in influence. A favor here, a secret there. Grayson, with his access to high places, was ideal for hiding messages or artifacts on rooftops across London. But ambition breeds treachery. Carver, the rival, may have seen an opportunity to ascend by eliminating Grayson and claiming the ledger. By mid-morning, Holmes had fully decrypted the marginal note, revealing more: red token false, true veil, in chimney. If I fall, seek the forgotten one, old Bess, at the docks. He slammed the ledger shut. A false red token, explaining the silk scrap at the scene, perhaps planted to mislead. The true veil, saffron, is the society's mark. And old Bess, at the docks, a forgotten witness, no doubt. We set out immediately for the London docks, a labyrinth of wharves and warehouses along the Thames, where fog mingled with the cries of gulls and the shouts of stevedores. Holmes inquired among the workers, describing old Bess as a potential informant. After several dead ends, a grizzled sailor pointed us to a decrepit barge, moored at the far end. Bess the beggar, they call her, lives on that old tub, sees everything but says nothing unless you cross her palm. We approached the barge, its deck cluttered with nets and crates. An elderly woman, hunched and wrapped in rags, sat mending a sail, her sharp eyes lifting as we boarded. "What do you want, gents? Ain't got time for idle chat." Holmes produced a sovereign, placing it in her weathered hand. "Information, madam, about Thomas Grayson, the roofer who fell. He mentioned you in a note. The forgotten one." Old Bess cackled, pocketing the coin. "Tommy Grayson, eh? Knew his PA back in the day. Tommy came to me a week afore he died, all fretful. Said he was tangled with some fancy club. The Saffron lot. Wanted me to hold summat for him, in case things went sour." She rummaged in a chest, producing a small envelope sealed with wax. "This," said, "if he didn't come back, give it to his wife. But ye look trustworthy. Take it, but mind ye, it's dangerous." Holmes opened the envelope carefully, revealing a single sheet, another encrypted note, but simpler. Deciphering it on the spot, he read aloud: "Carver is the limping betrayer. Faked injury to spy. Pushed me. No. Trick with wire. Ledger proves all. Protect William." I gasped. "Wire? So not a push, but a tripwire on the roof." Holmes nodded grimly. "Ingenious. Invisible in the dark. Strung across the ridge. Grayson fell while working. No signs of struggle. Carver, with his feigned limp, could have set it earlier, unobserved." Old Bess nodded sagely. "Tommy said Carver was jealous. Wanted his spot in the order. Hargreaves none the wiser. Watch yourselves, that lot don't like loose ends." As we left the docks, the encrypted note burning in Holmes's pocket, the pieces fell into place. Carver was the key, the rival, the intruder, the murderer. "To Carver's lodgings, Watson," Holmes declared. "But first, alert Lestrade. The net closes, but the spider may yet bite." The forgotten witness had unlocked the truth, but as the Thames fog enveloped us, I wondered if we were walking into a trap of our own. Chapter 10. Pursuit Through the Fog. The fog lay thick over London as Sherlock Holmes and I hastened from the docks, the encrypted note from old Bess burning like a brand in Holmes's pocket. Its revelation that Jacob Carver, the rival roofer, had faked a limp and likely used a tripwire to orchestrate Thomas Grayson's fatal fall had set Holmes's mind ablaze. Our destination was Carver's lodgings in Shoreditch, a warren of narrow streets and ramshackle tenements where the city's underbelly thrived. Holmes had wired Inspector Lestrade to meet us there with constables, but he insisted we press forward immediately, lest Carver slip through our grasp. "Watson," Holmes said as our cab rattled through the mist. "Carver is no mere tradesman turned murderer. His role in the Order of the Saffron Veil suggests ambition far beyond roofing. The ledger and Grayson's notes paint him as a schemer, willing to kill to secure his place. We must catch him unawares." The cab halted at a grimy corner where gaslights flickered feebly against the fog. Carver's lodging was a dilapidated boarding house, its windows dark save for a faint glow on the second floor. Holmes scanned the building, his eyes catching a shadow moving behind a curtain. "He's there," he whispered. "But we must be cautious. Carver knows the Order's secrets and may expect pursuit." We approached the door, which hung ajar, creaking ominously in the damp air. Inside, the hallway reeked of mildew and cheap tobacco. Holmes moved silently, his revolver drawn, a rare precaution that underscored the danger. I followed, my own weapon at the ready, my heart pounding as we ascended the creaking stairs. At the landing, Holmes paused, ear pressed to a door, marked with a faded C. A muffled sound came from within. Papers rustling, then a low curse. Holmes signaled, and with a swift kick he burst the door open, revealing a cramped room lit by a single candle. Jacob Carver, a wiry man with sharp features and a scarred cheek, stood frozen at a table strewn with documents. His eyes widened, and in a flash he bolted for the window, flinging it open to leap onto a fire escape. "After him, Watson!" Holmes shouted, already in pursuit. We clattered down the iron steps, Carver's figure barely visible in the swirling fog. He was agile, despite his supposed limp, which now seemed entirely absent as he sprinted across a rooftop and leapt to an adjacent building. Holmes followed with cat-like precision, and I struggled to keep pace, my boots slipping on the slick slates. The chase led through a maze of rooftops, chimney stacks looming like sentinels in the mist. Carver was fast, but Holmes's relentless drive closed the gap. At a narrow alley, Carver skidded to a halt, cornered by a sheer drop. He turned, brandishing a knife, his face twisted with defiance. "Stay back, Holmes," he snarled. "You don't set know what you set meddling with. The Order set's bigger than you, bigger than Grayson." Holmes advanced, revolver steady. "Your game is up, Carver. Grayson sit's note exposed you, the tripwire, the faked limp, the red silk planted to mislead. Confess, and you may yet avoid the gallows." Carver laughed bitterly, his eyes darting for an escape. "Grayson was a fool, hiding their secrets for a debt he didn't owe. I did what was needed, cleared my path. The Order promised me his place, but Hargreaves," he faltered, then lunged, knife flashing. I fired a warning shot, the crack echoing through the fog. Carver stumbled, dropping the knife, and Holmes seized him, pinning him against a chimney. "Who else, Carver?" Holmes demanded. "Who ordered Grayson Sitt's death? Hargreaves? The Order Sitt's counsel?" Carver Stick's defiance crumbled, his breath ragged. "Not Hargreaves. He sits a puppet. The counsel, they wanted the ledger safe, but Grayson was going to talk. I acted alone, used the wire, thought it said to look like a fool." Before Holmes could press further, shouts rang out below, Lestrade and his men, lanterns bobbing in the fog. Carver's shoulders sagged as constables swarmed the rooftop, cuffing him. Holmes handed over the encrypted note, explaining its contents to Lestrade, who nodded grimly. "Looks like a solid case, Holmes. But this Order business sounds like a nest of vipers." As Carver was led away, Holmes retrieved a scrap from the mansip's pocket, a saffron scarf, its edges frayed, confirming his tie to the order. "Not the red silk," Holmes murmured, "but the true veil." He planted the false token to throw suspicion elsewhere. We returned to the street, the fog now a shroud around us. "Carversit's confession ties the knot, Watson," Holmes said. "But the order remains. Grayson-Sitt's note mentioned a council, and Hargreaves-Sitt's ignorance suggests a higher power. We must uncover their lair before they strike again." I nodded, the chase's adrenaline still coursing through me. Carver was caught, but the mystery's heart still beat, hidden in the fog of secrets we had yet to pierce. Chapter 11. The Alibi Unravels. With Jacob Carver in custody, the fog that had cloaked London seemed to lift slightly, mirroring the clarity beginning to emerge in the case of Thomas Grayson's death. Yet, as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to 221B Baker Street in the early hours, I sensed that my friend's mind was far from at ease. Carver's confession had confirmed his role in the tripwire that caused Grayson's fatal fall, but Holmes's restless pacing and the way he clutched the saffron scarf suggested that the deeper machinations of the Order of the Saffron Veil remained unsolved. "Watson," Holmes said, tossing the scarf onto the table, "Carver is but a pawn, albeit a cunning one. His claim of acting alone reeks of convenience. The Order's counsel, mentioned in Grayson's note, pulls the strings. We must unravel Hargreaves' alibi. He claims he dined with Carver and others the night Grayson died. If that falls apart, we may expose the counsel's hand." By morning, Holmes had dispatched a telegram to Inspector Lestrade, requesting details of Hargreaves's associates and their whereabouts on the night of the murder. While awaiting a reply, we ventured to the Black Bull Tavern, where the foreman, Dutton, had been detained after his brawl. Holmes suspected Dutton's outburst might stem from more than mere grief over Grayson's death. The tavern was quieter in the daylight, its patrons nursing hangovers rather than raucous arguments. Lestrade met us at the door, his face weary but alert. "Dutton's in a cell at the station," he said, leading us through Cheapside's bustling streets. "Says he fought because some blokes were slandering Grayson, calling him a drunk who fell. But he's cagey about Carver, keeps clamming up." At the police station, Dutton sat in a cramped cell, his burly frame slumped on a bench. His knuckles were bruised, and his eyes darted nervously as Holmes approached. "Dutton," Holmes began, his voice calm but commanding, "your loyalty to Grayson is admirable, but your silence aids his killer. Carver has confessed to rigging a tripwire, but he claims he acted alone. I believe you know otherwise. Speak, or you may be complicit in more than a tavern brawl." Dutton's jaw tightened, but under Holmes's piercing gaze, he relented. "All right, Mr. Holmes. I didn't see the fall, but I heard things. That night I left the warehouse early, like I told you, but I doubled back round 11 to check on Grayson. He'd been acting strange, muttering about debts. I saw him on the roof, arguing with someone. Not Carver, someone taller, in a fine coat. Couldn't hear much, but Grayson shouted something about breaking the veil. Then I heard a clatter, like a tool dropping. I scarpered, didn't want trouble." Holmes leaned closer. "This man in the fine coat, did he limp?" Dutton frowned, thinking, didn't Stetton notice a limp? But he moved odd, like he was favoring one side. Couldn't Stet see his face? Too dark, and he wore a scarf, maybe yellow-like. "Saffron," Holmes corrected softly. "And Hargreaves-Sitt's alibi. Can you confirm he was dining elsewhere?" Dutton hesitated. Hargreaves said he was with Carver and some toffs at his Kensington house, but Carver came to the warehouse earlier that day, arguing with Grayson about work. He left before me, but I don't know where he went after. Hargreaves. He's not straight, Mr. Holmes. Always whispering with strange folk, giving Grayson odd jobs, special tasks, he called them. Holmes nodded, exchanging a glance with me. Thank you, Dutton. Your candour may yet save lives. As we left the cell, Lestrade handed Holmes a reply to his telegram. Hargreaves' staff confirmed a dinner with 3 guests, including Carver, but one servant noted Hargreaves slipped out for an hour, around 10, claiming a brief errand. An errand, Holmes mused, as we stepped into the street, long enough to reach Cheapside and argue with Grayson on the roof. Hargreaves lied about his whereabouts, Watson. He sits deeper in the order than he admits, perhaps even a council member. We hastened to Kensington, confronting Hargreaves at his residence once more. The merchant was visibly rattled, his florid face paling as Holmes laid out the evidence, Dutton's testimony, the servant's account, and the saffron scarf tying the order to the crime. Your alibi is a house of cards, Mr. Hargreaves, Holmes said coldly. You were seen at the warehouse, arguing with Grayson. Did you order Carver to kill him, or did you take matters into your own hands? Hargreaves collapsed into a chair, his bravado gone. I didn't kill him.
Yes.
I went to the warehouse to check on Grayson's progress with the ledger. He was supposed to hide it securely, but he was wavering, talking of confessing to his wife. I argued with him, told him the order wouldn't forgive betrayal, but I left him alive. I swear, Carver, he's ambitious, always was. If he rigged a wire, it was his own scheme to curry favour with the council. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And the council? Who are they? Hargreaves shook his head, fear in his eyes. I can say. They shadows, even to me. They meet in secret, use coded messages. The ledger lists their debts, their power. If its debts exposed, debts ruined. As we departed, Holmes's expression was grim. Hargreaves is a coward, Watson, but not our mastermind. The council remains elusive, and Carver's confession may be a shield for their true leader. We must find their meeting place. The Seville Council Grayson feared. The alibi's collapse had tightened the net, but as we walked into the grey London day, I felt the Order's invisible eyes watching, their secrets still perched on a dangerous height. Chapter 12. Hidden Alliances. The revelations of Hargreaves' broken alibi and Carver's confession had propelled the case into a new realm of complexity, one where the shadowy order of the Saffron Veil loomed larger than ever. Sherlock Holmes, undeterred by the late hour, had returned to 221B Baker Street with a fervour that belied the exhaustion I felt creeping into my bones. The sitting room was a chaos of papers, with the ledger open once more, its cryptic entries illuminated by the flickering gaslight. Holmes's pipe sent clouds of smoke curling toward the ceiling as he traced connections only his mind could see. Watson, he said, his voice taut with focus, the Order's counsel is the heart of this mystery. Grayson's note warned of their power, and Hargreaves' fear confirms they are no mere club of merchants. We must uncover their meeting place, where these veils convene. The ledger holds the key, but its ciphers are layered, protecting their secrets. I peered at the pages, the symbols as impenetrable as ever to my untrained eye. Can you decode it fully, Holmes? Or do we need another source? He tapped a pencil against the table. The cipher is a substitution code with a rotating key, but Grayson's marginal notes provide clues. Look here. Council meets under the spire, new moon. The new moon was the night of his death, suggesting a meeting coincided with his fall. A spire implies a church or cathedral, a place of secrecy masked by sanctity. Holmes cross-referenced a map of London, his finger landing on St. Dunstan in the east, a church near Cheapside with a distinctive spire, its crypt rumoured to host clandestine gatherings. "This fits," he said. "Close to the warehouse, easily accessible for Hargreaves and Carver. We must investigate tonight, before the Order learns of Carver's arrest and scatters." We donned dark coats and set out into the night, the fog now a thin veil over the city. St. Dunstan's loomed ahead, its spire a black silhouette against the moonless sky. The churchyard was silent, save for the drip of rainwater from ancient yews. Holmes tested the side door to the crypt, finding it locked but yielding to his lockpick with a soft click. We descended a stone staircase into a damp, musty chamber, where a faint glow emanated from behind a heavy oak door. Holmes pressed his ear to the wood, signalling silence. Muffled voices drifted through, low, urgent and cultured. "The ledger is lost," one said. "Carver failed us, and Grayson Sitt's death has drawn Holmes. We must act before the veil is torn." Another voice, colder, replied, "Hargreaves is weak. If he talks, we cut him loose. The spire must remain hidden." Holmes eased the door open a crack, revealing a chamber lit by candles, their light glinting off saffron scarves worn by a half-dozen figures seated around a stone table. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but one man's silhouette, tall, with a slight hunch, matched Hargreaves' frame. Another, smaller and wiry, gestured sharply, his voice the cold one we'd heard. Holmes whispered, "The council. But we need proof names, not shadows." He slipped a small mirror from his pocket, angling it to catch their reflections. As he did, a floorboard creaked under my foot, and the voices stopped. The wiry man snapped, "Someone sits here." Chaos erupted. The figures scattered, dousing candles and plunging the crypt into darkness. Holmes seized my arm, pulling me back up the stairs as footsteps echoed behind. We burst into the churchyard, pursued by two hooded figures, one limping slightly, perhaps the true limping shadow, not Carver's feigned injury. Holmes veered into an alley, dodging crates and barrels, but our pursuers were relentless, their knives glinting in the dim light. Holmes spun, hurling a handful of gravel to distract them, and we ducked behind a wall. "Watson, your revolver, cover me," he hissed. I fired a shot into the air, and the pursuers hesitated, then retreated into the fog, their saffron scarves vanishing like ghosts. Panting, we regrouped in the churchyard. Holmes' Sip's face was grim but triumphant. "We seen the council, Watson, and they know we sipped close. That limping figure, not Carver, but another, higher in their ranks. The ledger Sip's final cipher, must name them." Back at Baker Street, Holmes pored over the ledger with renewed vigour, decoding a final entry: Counsel H, the merchant; C, the climber; V, the voice; and S, the spire's keeper. He slammed the book shut. H is Hargreaves. C is Carver. V and S remain. V, the posh voice heard on the roof, and S, likely the limping leader we saw tonight. Tomorrow we bait them, Watson. A trap at the warehouse, using the ledger as lure. As I prepared for bed, the chase through the fog lingered in my mind. The Order's hidden alliances were unravelling, but the Council's true power lay just beyond our reach, waiting in the shadows of the spire. Chapter 13. The Laboratory Deduction. The morning after our perilous encounter at St. Dunstan's crypt found Sherlock Holmes in a state of intense focus. The sitting room of 221B Baker Street transformed into a makeshift laboratory. The table was cluttered with vials, a microscope, and the ledger, its pages open to the final ciphered entries. The saffron scarf, the etched slate from the warehouse roof, and the vial of saffron powder lay beside a burner where Holmes was conducting an experiment, the acrid scent of heated chemicals mingling with his ever-present pipe smoke. I watched, nursing a cup of tea, as he meticulously tested the tar sample we had collected from the rooftop. "Watson," Holmes said, peering through the microscope, "the tar is the key to proving Carver-Sitt's method. Grayson-Sitt's note suggested a tripwire, but its execution required precision. This tar contains traces of fine wire shavings, steel, not rope, confirming a deliberate trap." I leaned closer, intrigued. "So Carver embedded a wire in the tar to make it invisible in the dark?" "Precisely," Holmes replied, adjusting the lens. The wire was strung across the ridge, coated in tar to blend with the roof. Grayson, working by lantern light, would not have seen it. A simple tug from below, perhaps by our limping shadow, could have tripped him, sending him over the parapet without a trace of struggle. He turned to the ledger, pointing to the decoded entry. "Counsel H the merchant, C the climber, V the voice, C the spire's keeper, Carver the climber, set the trap," Holmes continued, "but V or S likely orchestrated it. V, the posh voice heard arguing with Grayson, and C, the limping leader we glimpsed last night, are the true architects. Hargreaves, our merchant, is complicit but not the mastermind." To test his theory, Holmes had constructed a small model of the warehouse roof using a wooden board and string, simulating the tripwire's placement. He demonstrated how a thin steel wire, barely visible, could be anchored in the tar and triggered remotely. "Ingenious, Watson," he said, pulling the string to collapse a small figure. "No signs of a struggle, no witnesses to a push, only a fall, perfectly staged." I frowned, still piecing it together. But why kill Grayson? If he was hiding the ledger for the order, why eliminate him? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Grayson was wavering. His note to old Bess said he planned to reveal the truth to Eleanor, his wife. The order thrives on secrecy. A defector threatens their entire network. Carver, ambitious for a higher role, saw an opportunity to prove his loyalty by silencing Grayson. But Sess, the spire's keeper, likely gave the order, using Carver as a tool. Holmes then turned to the saffron powder from the chimney cache, sprinkling it into a solution. "This powder," he said, "is not mere decoration. It's a rare blend, laced with a chemical marker likely used to authenticate order documents. I've sent a sample to my chemist friend, Dr. Adler, for analysis, but it ties the ledger directly to their rituals." As he spoke, a telegram arrived from Inspector Lestrade. "Hargreaves detained for questioning. Admits to order membership, but denies murder. Claims cyst is a figure called Silas, a recluse in Whitechapel. No trace of V yet." Holmes's face lit with triumph. "Silas, the spire's keeper. Our limping shadow, perhaps. Whitechapel is our next destination. But first, we set a trap. The Order knows we have the ledger. They'll come for it. Tonight we return to the warehouse, leaving word via Lestrade's men that the ledger is unguarded in the chimney cache. If Silas or V takes the bait, we'll have them." We spent the afternoon preparing, Holmes rigging a false cache in the warehouse chimney with a decoy ledger, while Lestrade positioned plainclothes constables nearby. As dusk fell, we took our positions in the shadows of the alley, the fog rolling in once more. My revolver was heavy in my hand, the weight of the coming confrontation pressing on me. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the distant clatter of hooves. Then, a faint scrape from above. The roof, Holmes signalled, and we crept up the ladder, hearts pounding. A figure stood near the chimney, cloaked and limping, prying at the false cash. But as Holmes sprang forward, another shadow emerged. A second figure, his voice sharp and cultured, barking orders. "Silas, hurry! Holmes is near." "Vor," Holmes whispered, and we charged. The limping figure, Silas, dropped the decoy ledger and fled across the roof, but the second man, Vor, drew a pistol. I fired a warning shot, and he bolted, vanishing over the parapet into the fog. Silas, less agile, stumbled, and Holmes tackled him, pinning him down as Lestrade's men swarmed up. "Silas, the spire sits keeper," Holmes said, breathless but triumphant, as the man was cuffed. "Your counsel is crumbling." Silas, a gaunt man with a scarred leg, spat defiantly. "You still never catch Ver." He sits, the order sits voice, untouchable. As the constables led Silas away, Holmes retrieved the decoy ledger, his expression grim. "One down, Watson. But V remains, the voice that argued with Grayson, the true puppet master. The laboratory has confirmed the method, but the motive lies with V. Tomorrow we hunt the voice in Whitechapel. Over pursue." The night's trap had snared a key player, but as we descended into the fog, I knew the Order's final secret still eluded us, lurking in the shadows of London's darkest corners. Chapter 14. The Final Confrontation. The capture of Silas, the limping spire's keeper, had tightened the noose around the Order of the Saffron Veil, but Sherlock Holmes's relentless pursuit of the truth drove us onward. Dawn had barely broken over London when we set out for Whitechapel, a district where poverty and shadows cloaked secrets as thickly as the fog. The ledger's final cipher had named Vir, the voice, as the Order's true mastermind, and Holmes was certain this elusive figure, whose cultured tones had been heard arguing with Grayson on the fatal night, held the key to the case's resolution. "Watson," Holmes said as our cab rattled through the grimy streets, "Silas confirmed Fine's role as the Order Sept's leader. His escape last night proves he Sept's cunning, but desperate. We must find his lair before he vanishes into the Order Sept's network." Our destination was a derelict tenement near Commercial Street, identified by Lestrade's informants as a place where Silas had been seen meeting a gentleman in a saffron scarf. Holmes had also received word from Dr. Adler, his chemist contact, confirming the saffron powder's unique composition, a marker used exclusively by the Order for coded messages, tying V directly to the ledger's secrets. The tenement loomed before us, its windows boarded, its walls stained with soot. Holmes signalled caution as we entered, stepping over broken bottles and debris. The air was thick with damp and decay, and a faint murmur of voices echoed from an upper floor. We climbed a rickety staircase, my revolver drawn, Holmes's eyes scanning every shadow. At the top, a door stood ajar, revealing a dimly lit room where a single figure stood at a table, burning papers in a brazier. Holmes kicked the door wide, his voice commanding, "Enough, V. Your counsel is broken. Your ledger exposed. Stand and face justice." The figure turned, revealing a tall, gaunt man with piercing eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, his demeanour unnervingly calm. A saffron scarf hung loosely around his neck, and his voice, sharp, cultured, unmistakably posh, confirmed his identity. Holmes, he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, you are persistent, but you're too late. The Order's secrets burn as we speak. Holmes advanced, undeterred. Victor Langley, I presume, the voice heard on the warehouse roof, orchestrating Grayson's murder. Your tripwire, set by Carver under your orders, was clever, but Grayson's notes betrayed you. The ledger names you as the council's head, and Silas has confessed your role. Langley's smile faltered, but he remained composed, tossing another paper into the flames. Grayson was a liability. He inherited his father's debt to the Order, a favor from decades past when we saved his family from ruin. But he grew weak, threatening to expose us to his wife. I argued with him that night, urged him to stay loyal. When he refused, I ordered Carver to act, a simple wire, and the problem fell away. I gripped my revolver tighter, anger rising. You killed a man for his loyalty faltering. What secrets are worth such a price? Langley's eyes gleamed. Power, Dr. Watson. The Order binds London's elite, merchants, politicians, even police. Our ledgers track their debts, their indiscretions. Grayson's roof hiding was but one cog in our machine. Hargreaves funded us. Carver enforced. Silas guarded, but I spoke for the Order. Holmes stepped closer, his gaze locked on Langley. And the red silk, a false token to mislead, while your saffron veil marked the true Order. Langley nodded, almost admiringly. A distraction. The police saw an accident. You saw deeper, but this ends here. Holmes, the ledger sep's power dies with these flames. Before he could burn more, Holmes lunged, knocking the brazier over and scattering embers. Langley drew a concealed pistol, but I fired a warning shot, shattering a window. He froze, and Holmes wrestled him to the ground, pinning him as Lestrade's constables, alerted by our earlier wire, stormed in. As Langley was cuffed, Holmes salvaged the unburned papers, fragments of coded messages linking the Order to half a dozen prominent figures. Enough to dismantle their network, Holmes said, his voice grim but satisfied. Grayson Sitt's death will not be in vain. Langley glared, his composure finally breaking. You Sits won this round, Holmes, but the Order Sitt's roots run deep. Others will rise. Holmes met his gaze coolly. Then I shall be waiting. As the constables led Langley away, Holmes turned to me, the ledger and scarf in hand. The confrontation is over, Watson. But one twist remains. Grayson Sitt's final act was to protect his family. We must ensure his legacy endures. The case was nearing its close, but as we stepped into the Whitechapel dawn, I sensed the shadow of the Order lingering, its final secrets poised to unravel, in the light of Holmes' relentless deductions. Chapter 15. The Twisted Resolution. The arrest of Victor Langley, the Order of the Saffron Veil's cunning mastermind, should have marked the end of the case. But Sherlock Holmes's restless intellect hinted at one final revelation. As we returned to 221B Baker Street, under a sky bruised with the first light of dawn, the ledger, saffron scarf, and salvaged papers from Langley's lair lay on the table, their secrets nearly fully unravelled. Yet Holmes's brow was furrowed, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm as he pored over Grayson's last encrypted note from Old Bess. Protect William. Watson, he said, his voice low. Langley confessed to orchestrating Grayson Sitt's murder, with Carver as his tool and Silas as his enforcer. Hargreaves played the financier, but therein sits a gap, a final piece Grayson hid, not in the ledger, but for his son. I frowned, weary from the night sipst's exertions, for William, but the note only warned of Carver and the tripwire. What more could there be? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Grayson's words, "Father's curse and protect William," suggest a legacy beyond the Order's debts. His father's debt bound him to the Order, but Grayson broke that chain. I suspect he hid something tangible, a safeguard for his family tied to that key we found in his box. We hastened to Bethnal Green, where Mrs. Grayson and young William awaited news. The small parlour was as we'd left it, the photograph of Thomas Grayson gazing sternly from the mantel. Holmes knelt before William, his tone gentle but urgent. "William, your father left you something, a secret to keep you safe. Did he ever speak of a hiding place, perhaps tied to his trade?" William Septz's eyes widened, then darted to the fireplace. "Pa said once, if anything happened, to check the hearthstone. Said it was said, or roof, our safety. Set, I thought he was just being pass." Holmes moved swiftly, examining the fireplace. With a small crowbar, he pried up the hearthstone, revealing a hollow beneath. Inside was a sealed tin, unlocked by the key from Grayson's box. Within lay a bundle of documents, property deeds, not for the warehouse, but for a small cottage in Kent, free of any lien, and a letter in Grayson's hand. Holmes read aloud, "My dearest Eleanor and William, if you read this, I am gone. The Order forced me to hide their secrets, but I've turned their game against them. These deeds secure your future, bought with my last payments from Hargreaves. The Order's counsel, Langley, Silas and others threatened us, but I've left proof of their crimes in the ledger. If Holmes finds this, trust him to end it. Forgive me, your loving Thomas." Mrs. Grayson wept softly, clutching William, who stared at the deeds with a mix of pride and sorrow. "Pa did this for us," he whispered. "He wasn't set just a roofer." Holmes' rare smile flickered. "He was a man of courage, William, who outwitted a cabal. These deeds ensure your independence, free from the Order's shadow." Back at Scotland Yard, Holmes handed the ledger and salvaged papers to Lestrade, who promised to pursue the Order's remaining members, politicians and merchants named in the codes. Langley, Silas and Carver faced trial, their confessions dismantling the Order's network. Hargreaves, exposed as a collaborator, fled London, his reputation in ruins. As we left the Grayson home, Holmes paused in the street, the morning sun cutting through the fog. The twist, Watson, was Grayson Sipter's foresight. He knew the Order Sipter's greed would undo them, so he hid not just their secrets, but a future for his family. A roofer Sipter's legacy, stronger than any spire. I nodded, moved by the resolution. Grayson's fall had been no accident, but his final act had built a foundation for justice and redemption, a fitting end to a case that had tested even Holmes's brilliance. Thus concluded the case of the roofer's fatal fall, a tale of shadows, secrets, and a father's sacrifice. Sherlock Holmes had peeled back the layers of the Order of the Saffron Veil, exposing a web of deceit that stretched from London's rooftops to its darkest crypts. The final twist, Grayson's hidden deeds, ensured his family's safety, proving that even in death, a man's love could outlast a murderer's scheme. As Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the city seemed a little brighter, its mysteries one step closer to the light of truth. What did you think of this thrilling conclusion? Were you shocked by Grayson's clever legacy or the Order's unravelling? Share your thoughts and tell us where you're listening from. London's foggy streets, a cosy cafe, or a far-off corner of the world. Subscribe now to join Holmes and Watson for more gripping adventures, and don't miss our next tale of deduction and danger.